The circle that was never meant to close. There is a village in northern Vietnam so forgotten that even the maps hesitate to remember it. No electricity lines reach it. The only road ends half a mile before its first wooden house. And the fog, oh the fog, rolls in so thick in the mornings that it's said you can't see your own hands even as they tremble in front of your face. This is where the house stands. Not haunted, not cursed, just wrong. The locals never call it a haunted house. In fact, they don't call it anything at all. When pressed, they simply lower their voices and refer to it as that place where space folds. A phrase that makes no sense, but somehow feels appropriate. It sits at the edge of the village, beyond a decaying bridge, and beneath a canopy of bamboo that always seem to sway in circles, even when the wind is still. The house is old, yes, but it doesn't look abandoned. Its wooden walls are intact, the tiles never fall, the door is never broken, and still no one dares approach, because no one builds a house with no corners by accident. Every wall curves, every room leaps into another, and yet the house is not locked. It waits, and it remembers. Arrival, the students who didn't believe. It began with a thesis project. 4 students from the Hanoi University of Architecture arrived that summer with backpacks, tripods, and arrogance. They were tired of theory, tired of copying blueprints of French villas and Soviet apartment blocks. They wanted something original, something vernacular yet visionary, as their professor liked to say. So when Dui, the most ambitious of the group, found a footnote in an old ethnographic journal about a circular dwelling in Bac Can, possibly designed as spiritual containment, he saw opportunity. "Think about it," he said on the bus, grinning. "What if we uncover some indigenous geometry, a spiritual logic for curves? This could be award-winning work." Trying, the only girl in the group and the most practical frowned. Or just folklore wrapped in nonsense. Min, who never stopped filming everything, muttered from behind his lens. Either way, creepy makes good content. And Kwang, the quiet one, said nothing, but he kept staring out the window as the city melted into jungle. The villagers were not welcoming. At first, they offered no directions, no stories. They pretended not to understand. But once the students dropped the name of the house, without corners, the temperature shifted. The innkeeper refused to let them stay more than one night. An old woman at the market crossed herself and said, "You will lose your way not outside, but inside." And the local builder they hired to carry equipment quit after reaching the gate, whispering only, "Don't walk in a line." Inside, the first walkthrough. The house surprised them, not in its condition, but in its effect. No locks, no resistance. The door creaked open like it was waiting. A strange warmth greeted them, neither inviting nor hostile, just awake. Inside, nothing felt level. The floor curved slightly, like they were always about to tip forward. The walls arched without reason. Even the ceiling bowed gently as if breathing in slow waves. "Did they use some kind of early biomorphic design?" Trang asked half-mockingly. "Or were they just drunk?" "No," Kwang said, speaking for the first time in hours. His eyes didn't blink as he looked around. They weren't drunk. They were afraid of something. There were no mirrors in the house, no sharp edges. Even the furniture was carved into smooth ovals and warped benches. The windows were thin slits that curved with the wall, like the house didn't want to be watched, or watched too closely. And then they found the bedroom. It was the only room with a closed door. When Dui opened it, the scent hit them first. Old wood, rain-damp sheets, and something faintly metallic. The bed sat in the center, perfectly round, without a frame, just a mattress with a strange indentation, as if someone had been lying there for too long. A small red pillow rested at its center. It looked recently fluffed. Min, of course, started. Trang touched the mattress and pushed it. It's warm. That's not possible, he said. There's no one here, no heating, nothing. Kwong didn't step in. He remained at the door and whispered, almost inaudibly, "Don't sit on her bed." Night 1. Circles in the mind. That night they camped near the house. No one dared sleep inside. They said it was because of rats or the smell, but the truth was thicker than that. Each of them dreamed of the same hallway, circular, curved, no doors. Each step echoed behind them, twice. In the morning, they didn't talk about it. Instead, Dwi examined the layout he'd sketched the night before and realized the measurements didn't add up. The house was bigger inside than it appeared from the outside. Trang, calculating again with a laser tool, confirmed it. "It's growing," she said half-jokingly, "or we're shrinking." Min was quiet. He hadn't slept well. He showed them the footage he recorded, frame by frame. In the bedroom, the clip after the red pillow, after Trang's hand, there was a flicker. A woman's face, blurred, pale, mouth open, eyes locked on Min behind the camera, and then gone. They all stared at the screen. No one said a word. Then Dwi broke the silence. "We go in again properly, map the whole thing, floor by floor, before anyone else steals this." Trang shook her head. "We shouldn't." But the door was already opening again, without being touched. The cursed blueprint. They thought it was just a strange house, a design anomaly, something they could map, secure, analyze, and then leave behind. But the house had other plans. It started with the blueprint. Dewey, the lead student, laid out the floor plan he had carefully drawn the night before. Every measurement was double-checked, laser scanned, photographed, but something didn't sit right. There were no straight lines, no right angles, no axis of symmetry, no center. "It doesn't orient," Trang said, tracing the curves with her finger. "There's no front, no back, no beginning, no end." Min held the paper up, flipped it, turned it around. "No matter which way you look, it feels off. But inside the house, everything feels normal, like it's supposed to be this way." Kwong, quiet as always, was sitting near the door. He didn't even look at the blueprint. He just said, "It feels natural, but it's not right." They were told to find a man named Nyom. He was the oldest living villager, blind now, but once a respected builder. They found him in a bamboo hut at the forest's edge, weaving a basket by touch. He didn't ask why they came. He just said, "You're here about the house with no corners. I've been waiting." And he began to speak. "I was young, strong. I knew how to build with stone, wood, anything you wanted. One day a woman came to me, not from here. She never gave her name. She never smiled. She handed me a drawing, not a blueprint, just loops, spirals, arcs. I asked her, 'What are you building?' She looked at me and said, 'A place where the thing that killed my child can never walk straight again.' The house was impossible to build. No straight bricks, no flat beams. Every material had to be bent, softened, warped. Even the windows were shaped like slits, like narrow, curved eyes. And every night while they worked on the house, something walked inside it. Footsteps, Nyum said, always circling, never stopping. One worker quit in the middle of the job. He said he saw something crawling upside down along the ceiling. A week later, they found him dead, curled up in a corner. His last words were, "No one should sleep on her bed." When asked about the woman, Nyum just shook his head. She never moved in, she vanished. But people started seeing her, or something shaped like her, standing in the doorway on moonless lights. The village tried to forget, but the house remembered, and it waited. Trang studied the blueprint again, comparing it to the structure. She noticed that the cracks on the walls, they all curved, none ran straight. Dewey brought Tumpus to check magnetic orientation. The needle spun slowly, refusing to lock on north. "It's not just the space," she whispered. "The house bends direction." Min installed a camera in the central room. The footage played back in perfect loops. Every 57 minutes, the same motions, the same lighting, the same silence. Like time wasn't passing, like it was circling. An old woman in the market finally spoke. Her voice was shaky. She was blamed for a sin she didn't commit. They called her cursed. They broke into her house. They made her beg, and then they left her with no one. That night, she killed her husband, her son. Then she lay down on the bed and set herself on fire. But there was no body, only ashes spread in a perfect circle. When they returned to Nyum's hut, he held Kwang's hand tightly. He asked, "Do you hear it?" "What do you hear?" "The steps, the ones that walk in circles. They're closer now." Dewey scoffed. "He's just messing with us." But Nyum didn't speak to Dewey. He leaned in toward Kwang and whispered, "If you go back inside, don't go alone. And whatever you do, don't sit on the red bed. That's where the straight path dies."
Part 2. The Laws of Curved Space. They returned to the house not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't stay away. There was something about it that made the world outside feel less real. The moment they stepped inside again, it was as if their memories softened at the edges. Time lost its shape. Their questions changed too. They were no longer asking what the house was, but why it was watching them. Trong tried to map it again, using everything from laser measurements to handmade sketches. But no matter how many times she recalculated, the math refused to settle. Every wall curved just slightly, just enough to make straight-line thinking impossible. The marble she dropped on the floor refused to roll forward. It always curved, always to the left. Every hallway they walked felt like it tilted downward, but the floor stayed level. The ceiling bowed like a wave frozen in motion. The space disobeyed geometry, and yet their bodies adapted without protest, like they were being reprogrammed. They left for a few hours that afternoon to clear their heads, but when they came back, the furniture had moved. Not much, just a few inches off the chalk outlines they had marked earlier. But the movement wasn't random. It was curved, clockwise, always clockwise. The bench, the crescent-shaped chair, even the low table had all slid gently along some invisible orbit. Min checked the camera footage. The time-lapse showed them shifting like planets, slowly, smoothly, without a single touch. And then, for 13 minutes, something worse. The red pillow from the bedroom appeared in the living room, resting on the bench as if someone had just left it there. Then it vanished. That night, their dreams began to spiral. No longer were they just wandering halls, they were trapped within. The air was thicker, the walls pulsed, breathing flesh, and there was a whisper.
The woman, not sorrowful, just persistent, demanding. But every time they woke, they couldn't remember a single word, only the tone. It followed them into the morning like smoke on skin. Kuang stopped sketching. He couldn't draw straight lines anymore. His hand, once precise, now curled every mark. When Dui asked him to draw a square, he laughed, not because it was funny, but because he couldn't remember how. Min brought in a mirror, hoping to find something objective, but what he found was worse. His reflection was delayed. He raised a hand, and half a second later the image followed. Not a glitch, not an error, something else, something that wasn't him, reacting to him. And for one frame, there was a woman behind him, hair covering her face, body turned sideways. When he spun around, no one was there. But the reflection smiled, his own face smiling, though his mouth had not moved. They wrote down rules that night, or at least what they believed to be rules. Tuang called them the laws of the house. They weren't laws in the scientific sense, just observations, patterns that repeated. First, nothing inside stays still. Second, straight lines fade. Third, time loops, not in hours, but in seconds and gestures. Fourth, mirrors don't reflect, they remember. Fifth, thoughts curve, memories double back on themselves. And sixth, something is behind you. None of them mentioned the red bed again, but each of them dreamed of it. Warm, centered in a silent room. Someone had just gotten up. Someone would be back. Tuang once woke in tears and muttered, "It's not just a bed, it's a birthplace." Min tried walking the house's full perimeter, marking his steps, tracking with a GoPro. He walked for nearly an hour, but when he watched the footage, he had only made a single loop. The rest of the time, nothing. Just the sound of footsteps, continuous, but the image was frozen. And slowly, they began to lose things. Not items, not gear, themselves. Tuang forgot her last name. Min couldn't recall where he was born. Kuang stared at paper for an hour trying to write a sentence and ended up drawing a spiral instead. Dui, the one who had wanted this trip most, said it aloud. "We leave, today." No one objected. But when they reached the front door, it opened on its own. Not to the outside, not to the village, to another hallway. One they hadn't entered before. Curved, dim, breathing. And as they stepped forward, they heard something behind them. The soft sound of a pillow being fluffed. Part 3. The Looping Dreams. It began with the hallway, the one they didn't remember walking into, yet somehow now stood inside. It curled softly, like the arms of something ancient, just beneath the earth. The lights above were dim, but they pulsed like heartbeats trapped in glass. The floor wasn't wood anymore. It was smooth, cool, seamless, as if the house had finally shed its mask and revealed the part of itself that never pretended to be human. Dewey took a step forward, his breath tight. The hallway didn't resist him. It welcomed him. Trying followed, then Quang, then Ming, still filming, though his camera had begun to act strangely. The image flickered at the edges. His own hands looked wrong in the viewfinder. Too slow, too long. No one spoke, not because they were afraid to, but because their voices felt unnecessary. This was no longer a place for sound. It was a place for repetition. The first loop was subtle. They reached a round room, empty except for a low, circular bench in the center. They paused, looked around. Dewey marked the wall with a knife scratch, X, just to track their position. Then they exited through the opposite hallway. Another curve, another corridor, another room. Same bench, same walls, same X. Dewey stared at the scratch he had just made. "It's identical," he whispered. "No," said Quang softly. "It's the same." They tried turning back, but the path behind them had changed. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe it had looped. Ming played back the footage. The timestamp showed they'd been walking for 25 minutes, but the video was only 11. Looping sections, repeating frames. His voice repeating the same sentence in different rooms. "We're almost out. We're almost out. We're almost out." Except no one remembered him saying it even once. Sleep came strangely now. It was impossible to tell when they crossed from waking to dreaming. Some of them slept standing. Some never felt their eyes close. But each one dreamed. Always the hallway. Always the loops. Always the woman. She was never fully seen, only glimpsed, reflected in curved surfaces, standing at the end of a corridor that bent out of sight. Her voice came in pieces, shards of language cut by time. "She's behind the shape. Stop sleeping where she died. No one belongs on her bed." When they woke, they felt it, a shift, like the house had rearranged their memories while they weren't watching. Trang forgot why they came. Ming forgot his own last name. Quang forgot if he had a sister. Dewey started calling Trang Lan. None of them corrected him, because maybe she was. Maybe she had always been. One night, Quang screamed. They found him curled near the mirror, shaking violently. He kept pointing at his reflection. "Not me! That's not me! That's not..." They covered the mirror, wrapped it in a blanket. But Ming checked the footage later. In the recording, Quang's reflection was indeed wrong. It was smiling, even when Quang wasn't. It mouthed words, silent and slow. "It's not a house. It's a body." They stopped checking the clocks. Time had collapsed. The sun outside no longer followed any rhythm. Sometimes it was morning, sometimes dusk, sometimes stars blinked through the windows at noon. The house had taken their days and bent them into circles, and the dreams deepened. They no longer just walked. Now they repeated events, conversations, arguments they never had, memories that felt borrowed. Trang saw herself kissing someone she didn't know. Dewey dreamed of a childhood that wasn't his. Ming heard his mother calling him, but the voice was too young. Quang saw himself as a corpse lying in a curved coffin lined with red velvet. Every night they dreamed more and remembered less. One morning, they woke up in the same room, at the same time, sitting, already dressed. No one remembered sleeping. No one remembered speaking. But there they were, mid-conversation, as if their waking lives had been stitched onto the dreams. Ming turned to Dewey. "So we agreed you'd stay one more day." Dewey nodded slowly. "Yes, we did?" Trang stared at her hands. "Why do I feel like we've had this day already?" And Quang, quiet, pale, just whispered, "We have, at least 20 times." They started leaving notes to themselves. writing messages on their arms, scratching warnings into the walls. But the house was smarter. By the next morning, the ink had blurred, the scratches faded, the words rewritten. In one of them, Ming read, "You will try to leave, but the door is behind your fear, and fear is a circle too." He didn't tell the others, because deep down, he knew they already had. At the end of that loop, whichever loop it was, they found the red bed again. But this time, something was lying on it. Not a woman, not a ghost, something in between. Its shape was curved, its body unfinished. It had no face, but it breathed. And as they stood frozen, the air bent around them. Huang stepped forward, slowly, his face blank. Trang reached out to stop him, but her arm bent mid-motion, like her own body no longer answered to her. Huang sat on the red bed. The breath stopped, and the house exhaled. Grateful, part 4, the shadows that curved. The house changed as the Huang sat on the bed. It didn't collapse, it didn't scream, it just breathed differently. The air felt heavier now, as if every molecule had weight. The silence became rounder, deeper, no longer the absence of sound, but the presence of something listening. And the shadows, they began to move. Not fast, not aggressively, but with intention. They no longer stayed tied to the walls, to the feet that cast them. They curved around corners that didn't exist. They slid beneath closed doors. They whispered across the floor in slow spirals, as if tracing routes that didn't belong to this world. Dewey was the first to notice. His shadow stretched ahead of him one morning, even with the light behind him. He blinked. It blinked later. He stopped using flashlights, not out of fear, but because the light made it worse. Whenever they tried to shine beams down the hall, the shadows split and scattered like insects, only to return behind them seconds later, more numerous than before. Trong lit a candle, hoping for comfort. The flame burned steady, calm, but its light curved. It didn't illuminate straight ahead. It bent left, always left. When she held her hand close, the fingers cast no shadow at all. Just a blur. Just something twitching. Ming filmed everything, still believing, maybe, this would mean something. Proof, evidence, an explanation. But the footage betrayed him. Shadows on camera did things his eyes never saw. They waved, they reached, they copied movements before the real person moved. In one video, Dewey was walking down a hallway and his shadow turned to look at the camera. Only the shadow, not Dewey. And then, in a later clip, Ming saw himself sleeping, but his shadow was sitting upright, watching him. He deleted that file, then checked the recycle bin. It was empty, but the video was back on his desktop, renamed, "You Aren't the First." They began finding things they hadn't brought. A scarf none of them owned, a toothbrush with a worn handle, a child's shoe, all curved, warped, slightly melted at the edges, like memories half-formed. Once Trong found a notebook filled with sketches of her own face, distorted, circular. The pages signed Lon. She never called herself Trong again, because maybe she wasn't. Maybe she had never been. They avoided mirrors now, not because of what they saw, but because of what they didn't. Sometimes their reflections were missing, sometimes delayed, sometimes someone else entirely. One morning, Dewey shaved using a small broken shard of glass. As he watched, his reflection kept moving his hand after his stopped, dragging the razor too deep. Dewey screamed, dropped the glass, blood curved down his chin. In the mirror, his reflection smiled, and behind it, 2 women stood. One in white, one in black, both faceless. Kwong didn't speak anymore. Not since the bed. He followed them, watched them, but his eyes were never focused. His shadow moved when he didn't. And one day, he vanished. Not violently. They simply woke up, and he wasn't there. No bedding disturbed, no items missing. Just gone. But that evening, when they sat in the living room, they saw it. His shadow, still there, still sitting beside them. No body, no voice, just a dark curve that breathed when the room was silent. That was when they began to forget what outside felt like, what corners felt like, what mornings used to smell like, what conversations used to sound like. The house replaced things. Not quickly, not loudly, but absolutely. The word escape stopped meaning anything. Because escape requires direction, requires straight lines, and the house doesn't allow those anymore. Men tried drawing a map, just once more. Not with lasers, not with cameras, with charcoal. Line by line, he traced the house from memory, from experience, from instinct. He worked for hours, days maybe. When he finished, the paper looked like a spiral galaxy, curves on curves, rooms folding into each other, a center that could never be reached. In the middle, he had drawn something unintentional, a bed with someone on it, curled, waiting. When he tried to erase it, the charcoal spread, formed a face, his. Trang or Lan or whoever she had become refused to speak by then. She wrote things on the walls instead, not in Vietnamese, not in English, in spirals, symbols that looked like hooks or teeth. She spent hours whispering to the shadows, listening. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she laughed, sometimes she just nodded. When Dewey asked what she was doing, she looked at him with eyes full of sleep and said, "They're teaching me how to stay. Not everyone learns that, but I want to stay." Dewey tried to leave. He packed what he could find, stared at the front door. It was open. No tricks, no loops, just open. He stepped outside. The air was cool, the trees familiar, but his shadow didn't follow. It stayed in the doorway, curved, watching, stretching back into the house. He took another step. The sky above began to ripple, like water. And then he was back inside. Same hallway, same walls. The door was behind him, but now it was part of the wall. That night, he dreamed of himself as a shadow. No face, no voice, just movement, curving around rooms that had no floor, sliding beneath beds that breathed, chasing people he didn't know, only to find they were already him. He woke with blood on his hands, not from injury, from holding something, a red pillow. The final sign was simple. They stopped seeing their reflections entirely, not even distorted ones, just absence. The mirrors became windows to nothing. The shadows stopped moving. They stood still. They watched. And when Dwi looked around the room, he saw only 3 shadows on the wall, but only 2 people were there. One of them wasn't real anymore. Or maybe none of them were. Maybe the house had taken all their corners, all their edges, all their names, and curved them into something that could never leave. Part 5. Memory Collapse. The house no longer needed to trap them, because they no longer remembered where they wanted to go. There was no more talk of escape, no more counting days, no more maps, plans, or questions. Instead, there were fragments, whispers, half-dreams, names spoken without knowing whose they were, and every hallway led back to memory. Except now, the memories were wrong. Du woke up in a kitchen he didn't recognize. The light was warm, the table set, a meal half-eaten. Outside the window, trees, familiar but curved. Trong, or maybe Lan, stood at the sink, humming a tune Du didn't know. He spoke her name, but she didn't turn. He tried again, but the words came out wrong, bent, warped, as if the house was chewing through his language. She finally turned and smiled. "You're late for dinner." Du looked down. The food on the table was moldy. The plate was cracked. The fork had 4 curved prongs like fingers. He didn't remember sitting, but now he was eating. Ming found himself watching a video of his own face. The screen flickered, grainy. He was speaking clearly, calmly. "This is day 14, I think. I'm not sure. The loops are tightening. I don't know what's mine anymore." Then the face on the screen smiled. "But I think I've been here before. I think I always lived here." Ming paused the video, stared at the frame. The face was still smiling, even in the still image. Then it blinked. Lan, she didn't answer to any other name now, had begun speaking in loops. Every sentence she said had already been said the day before, or maybe the loop before. No one was sure. "The house remembers better than we do," she whispered, "so it gives us pieces. It lets us borrow, but only what it wants." She once spoke for 10 minutes straight, nothing but a single sentence, repeated over and over, bending slightly each time like a melody unraveling. "I didn't choose the bed. I didn't choose the bed. I didn't choose the..." Bend? She smiled at the mistake, then laughed, then wept. They began mixing each other up. Du called Ming Kwang. Ming called Lan mother. Lan called herself home. And no one corrected anyone, because the names felt old, unnecessary, like worn-out coats that no longer fit. At some point, Du stopped speaking altogether, but they still heard his voice, in the walls, in the recordings, sometimes even in their dreams, always saying the same thing. "It's okay. were just remembering forward. That night they found something new, a room they didn't recall ever seeing, though deep down they knew they had. It was a nursery, small, circular, pale blue walls curved up like a dome, a crib in the center, rocking slowly. Inside, nothing, but they felt it, a presence, soft, breathing. Lan stepped forward and touched the crib. Her eyes widened. This is where she was born, or where she will be. Then she looked at Du, at Ming, and said, or maybe it was one of us. Memories began to overlap. Du remembered his childhood, except it wasn't his.
The faces, the house, the language, none of it fit, but it felt real. Min remembered dying. He remembered lying in the red bed, feeling the fire crawl across his chest, the breath leaving his lungs. But then he woke, fine, and the bed was empty. Lan remembered too many things. She said she once had a daughter. Then she said she was the daughter. Then she said the daughter never existed except in dreams. The house gives us what we forget, she whispered. Even the things that never happened. The shadows stopped moving. They didn't follow anymore. They simply stood. Sometimes there was sometimes they were only shadows. They no longer knew which one was theirs. Lan traced hers with a finger. It didn't react. Instead, it traced her. Dewey stood in a room full of shadows, all shaped like him, but doing things he wasn't doing. One sat, one walked, one looked at him and mouthed, "There is no self, only echoes curved so tightly they become people." Then came the spiral days. They called them that, though time was long gone. These were the days when events looped too fast to notice. Wake, walk, eat, sleep, wake again, wake again, wake again, wake again. They stopped knowing if they were dreaming, stopped knowing if the person beside them was still the same. One day, Min watched Lan brush her hair for hours, only she wasn't holding a brush, and her hand never touched her head. She just repeated the motion, over and over, her eyes blank. Min tried to write again. He wrote a single word on the wall, exit. The next day, it had changed, exist. Then, exile. Then, echo. Then, nothing. Then, the wall was smooth again. They stopped finding food, but they never felt hungry. Stopped finding water, but their mouths were never dry. They didn't feel pain anymore, didn't feel joy, only familiarity, like they had always been. Curved, repetitive, worn down to the rhythm of something else's memory. Then Lan disappeared. Not suddenly, not violently. One morning they simply couldn't find her. But her voice remained. It whispered through the halls, in lullabies, in circles. Sometimes they saw her reflection in the curved windows, always smiling, always brushing her hair. And once, Dewey passed a mirror and saw her behind him, holding a child. At that point, Min understood. They weren't in a house. They were in a memory. Not theirs, not anyone's, really. A collective loop, a trauma shaped like shelter, a thought so painful it needed to be curved so it could never point back to the source. He cried that night, or thought he did, because the tears curved sideways down his face. The final moment came not with fear, but with surrender. Dewey looked at Min. Min looked at Dewey. Neither knew which one was which anymore. They sat on the red bed, side by side, and whispered the same thing at the same time. I remember being you. The shadows around them bowed. The lights dimmed. The house smiled.
Part 6. The Room Without Beginning. There is a place in every labyrinth where the center stops being a destination and becomes a question. The house never told them there was a center. It never promised an end. It never spoke. It guided. It heard. It grew. Until one day they simply arrived. Not by walking, not by choosing, but by becoming. The room was circular, of course, but not like the others. This one wasn't built. It didn't have walls. Or maybe the walls were the air itself, shaped by memory, not material. There was no ceiling, only darkness above, moving slightly like breath. The floor was not floor. It had no texture, no resistance, just the sense of standing on thought. At the center of this was a shape. Not a bed, not an altar, not a person. Just shape. Formed by shadows that bent back into themselves. And as Dewey stepped forward, he realized this was not a room. This was the first loop. Min followed, but he no longer felt like Min. He was a string of echoes, a memory reassembled from other people's fears, a name curved so tightly it unraveled into silence. He didn't ask what the room was. He already knew. This was where it all began and where everything returned. Not a starting point, but a place without beginning. They didn't speak. There was no need for words here. Words belonged to lineage, and this was not that. Instead, they stood in silence, and the room remembered them. It showed them visions, not of their lives, but of the house's, how it was born from grief, from a scream so sharp it bent space, from a death so cruel it refused to stay dead, from a mother who burned herself into memory so deeply she became architecture. They saw her, not clearly, but enough. A woman with no face, but many eyes. Her body twisted in the angles of betrayal. Her hands shaped like doorways. Her voice echoing in the rhythm of footsteps. She had built nothing, but someone else built for her. A place where sorrow could never escape, where vengeance could curve through eternity, where every straight line, every escape would eventually return to her. The house was not haunted. It was possessed by purpose. The visions faded, and still the shape in the center remained. It pulsed, not fast, not loud, but with intent.
A slow, steady reminder that something lived here. Not a ghost, not a god, but a thought that never forgot. Dewey stepped closer. The shape opened. Inside, mirrors, infinite, but curved. They reflected nothing directly, only fragments, possibilities. One saw himself, young, arriving at the village, and another who was already old, his eyes hollow, his voice whispering, and next, woman, burning and smiling. He reached out to touch the glass, but it bent away, not rejecting him, just reminding him, you can't touch what you've become. Ming fell to his knees, not from fear, from understanding. He began to speak, but the room spoke through him, a language made of breath and pause, of footstep and silence, of dreams repeated until they wrought into prayer. Dewey turned to him, but Ming was no longer Ming. He was Echo now. Memory looped so tightly it folded into a new name. Again. And Dewey? He was becoming before. They were not people now, not students, not intruders. They were pieces of her, of the house, of the shape. One walked in circles, one whispered into walls, one vanished into light, and the fourth watched from the center, holding the red pillow, smiling softly. This room had no exit because it had no entry. It was the curl inside a curl, the moment between breath, the silence before forgetting. Time did not move here, it folded. Memory did not flow, it pooled. And the house was full. Sometimes I knew this night. Villagers say the fog thickens near the edge of the woods, that they hear footsteps in soft spirals, that they see lights flicker in impossible directions. And sometimes, when the wind is slow and the trees are still, they hear it. Not a scream, not a moan, just a lullaby, sung by something that remembers. And if you walk far enough, past the broken bridge, past the bamboo that bends even when there's no wind, past the trail that curls until you forget you were ever walking, you might see it. A house with no corners, waiting. And as you step inside, you'll feel it. Not fear, not dread, but familiarity, as if you've been there before, as if you've always been there. Because in the end, the house doesn't take you. It just remembers you back.
Part 7. The Ones Who Stayed. They say the house forgets no one, that everyone who's entered still lives there, not as people, but as echoes, whispers folded into walls, footsteps sewn into floorboards, names stretched across shadow and sound. They are not gone. They are still speaking, but not in ways we recognize, not in straight lines. I was the one who stayed first. I don't know my name, but I remember the moment I stepped inside. I was curious. Curiosity has curves, too. They start sharp, then bend, then spiral. At first, I explored. Then I observed. Then I forgot I was observing, and the house began watching me back. I came here looking for silence. The city was too loud, too bright, too linear. I wanted stillness. What I found was something else. Here, the silence moves. It breathes around you. It remembers you even when you forget yourself. And over time, I learned, true silence isn't quiet. It's repetition. I was a child when I entered. I followed my mother, or a woman who said she was. She walked in circles until I couldn't tell if I was behind her or ahead of her. Now I walk too. Small steps, always to the left. Sometimes I see other people in the hall. Sometimes they look like me. Sometimes they cry when they see me.
I don't know why. I came in dreaming. I never opened the door. I never walked across the threshold, but I dreamt of it. Night after night, the curved hallway, the red bed, the mirror that lay. And one night, I never woke up. Now every dream begins the same. I'm back at the entrance, and the door is always open. We were lovers once, I think. We held hands when we entered. We laughed at the strange angles. We said we'd write a book about it. Now I see them sometimes, sleeping or walking backward through a memory I don't remember. They look at me with no recognition, but I still remember the sound of their breath. And that's enough. Sometimes. I tried to fight the house. I screamed, broke mirrors, ripped wallpaper, burned a pillow. I left marks, or thought I did. The next day, everything was curved again. Perfect, unbroken, like my rage had been gently folded into quiet. Now I whisper instead. It doesn't change anything. But the house listens more when I'm quiet. I became the furniture. Not literally, but close. I stayed in the same room too long, forgot what movement was. Now I am part of the space, a shape someone avoids, a presence in the corner of their vision. Sometimes they place things on me, a notebook, a single sock. I don't mind. It's nice to remember, even as an object. I tried to leave. I reached the door. It opened to a street I recognized. I stepped out, felt wind, saw trees, but something was wrong. There were no shadows. The sky didn't move. And when I blinked, I was back inside. Now I don't try anymore. The house isn't a prison, it's a boundary, and outside is just another room. I became many. I used to be one voice. Now I am a chorus. Sometimes I laugh, sometimes I whisper, sometimes I cry in languages I never knew. I am layered now, stacked, folded. If you hear me through the walls, don't try to understand, just listen. I make more sense when I echo. I was never real. I think the house made me, a placeholder, a filler shape, something it needed to complete a loop. But the others looked at me like I mattered, like I belonged. That made me real for a while. But now they're gone, they're forgotten, and I'm still here. So maybe I'm more real than them. Maybe the house kept me because I was never meant to leave. I am the red bed. Or I became it, or it became me. Either way, this is where people end. This is where the circle tightens, where memory becomes shape, and shape becomes trap, and trap becomes rest. If you lie here, you will sleep deeply, and when you wake, you will remember nothing except that you never left, and maybe that's peace. Maybe that's what she wanted all along. Some say the house is empty now, that no one remains. But those who listen know better. They hear breathing behind the walls, steps too soft to be theirs, laughter that doesn't belong. They hear stories, not told, but repeated, in dreams, in fog, in circles. They hear us, because we are still here, the ones who stayed. If you enter the house, and you will if you've heard it calling, remember this: don't follow your reflection, don't sleep where it's warm, don't count your footsteps, and whatever you do, when the hallway begins to loop, when your name starts to bend, when the shadow behind you whispers a memory you never lived, do not answer. Because once you do, you stay. And we already have enough of you in here.
Part 8. The exit that leads back in. The house gives you an exit when it's ready. Not when you ask, not when you beg, not when you scream or pray. Only when you've forgotten what you were trying to leave. That's when the door appears. Wooden, ordinary, slightly open, light spilling through like memory, and it always feels like mercy. Dewey found the exit on what might have been a Thursday. He no longer kept track of days. The hallway had softened around him, its curves less aggressive, the walls no longer pulsing. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, he could stand straight, think clearly. The door stood at the end of a straight corridor, a miracle in itself, a betrayal of the house's rules. It didn't pulse, didn't whisper. It just waited, and so did he. He didn't run toward it. He knew better. The house expected patience. He walked slowly, evenly, measuring each step, careful not to break the spell. And when he touched the doorknob, cold, metal, real, he hesitated. Then he opened it and stepped out. Light, air, birds, a world that smelled like rain and trees and other people's kitchens. He was outside, outside the house, outside the loop. He could feel the dirt beneath his feet, could see the sky in proper shape, flat, vast, uncurved. He laughed, cried, collapsed into the grass. He was free. Weeks passed. He found the village, or what remained of it. Most homes were empty. Time had folded them too, it seemed. But there were still people, still whispers. And when he spoke of the house, they listened, they nodded, and they said what they always said. They let one go every few decades, so it can remember itself through someone else. He was safe now. He told himself that every morning. He felt it in the sun, in the food, in the faces of people who didn't curve when they turned. But then, the small things started to slip. He tried to draw the house, and the paper curled in his hand. He spoke his name, and it echoed once softly as if being repeated behind his ear.
He dropped a spoon, and it spun counterclockwise before falling. He began waking up in the hallway. At first, he thought they were dreams.
He'd open his eyes to a familiar corridor, dim, curved. He'd blink, and he was back in bed. He wrote it off. Trauma, lingering memory, ghosts of the spiral. But then the mirror began to delay again. Then the shadows began to move when he didn't. Then the door handle to his room bent. He tried to run, left the village, crossed rivers, climbed mountains, chased linearity. But wherever he went, the rooms bent slightly. The ground pulsed faintly. And at night, the red bed returned. He screamed once, loud, pure, and a voice whispered back, "You walked out the door, but you took the house." Because the truth is this: there is no escape. There is only exit and return. The house doesn't trap the body, it wraps around the mind. Once you've walked its halls, it remembers you. Once you've seen its loops, they imprint. You carry it in your thoughts, in your dreams, in the corners you no longer trust. You bring it into new space. You recreate it without meaning. And one day, someone else steps into a house you built without realizing, and they loop too. Dwai changed over the years. He no longer remembered what he studied, or why he entered the house, or who the others were, but he remembered the shape, the soft bend of wood, the way shadows watched, the gentle pull leftward. He didn't speak of it anymore. There was no need. But people around him began to report strange dreams, a feeling of being watched, the red bed appearing in their sleep. And sometimes, when they followed Dwai home, they couldn't find the corners in his house, not a single one. Eventually, Dwai stopped aging, or perhaps the house remembered him too vividly to allow change. He simply remained, in the house outside the house, in the spiral outside the spiral. His reflection never blinked anymore. He smiled often, but only when no one was watching. And when they asked where he lived, he always gave the same answer: nowhere, or maybe just behind you. And so the door remains. It opens for those the house chooses, those it loves, those it wants to remember differently. You can step through. You can breathe the outside. You can feel free. But if the house remembers you, you will carry it in the folds of your sleep, in the bends of your spine, in the parts of your memory that don't align quite right anymore. And one day, you will wake up not in bed, not in your home, but in the hallway again, hearing footsteps curving softly behind you. The exit was real, but it was always curved. It didn't lead out. It only led you deeper, back in.
Part 9. The Architect Without a Face. Before there were footsteps, before there were walls, before dreams began to loop, there was her, the one they now call the architect, not because she built with hands, but because she shaped with grief. The house does not belong to her. It is her. Every curve, every silence, every door that leads to itself is a breath she never finished. They say she once had a face, a name, a child, a life before the spiral. But names dissolve in repetition. Faces fade when no one remembers them clearly. And the child was taken. This is how the story goes, at least this version. There was a woman who lived at the edge of a village, alone, quiet, watching the world with tired eyes. She had a daughter, full of laughter that did not end. One night, the laughter stopped. She had gone to the river, the forest, or someone else's house. No one agreed. No one searched long, because they said the girl was cursed, born without shadows, without corners, like her mother. The woman begged, but the village turned its eyes away. Too many strange things had happened, too many nights where walls groaned and mirrors screamed. They feared what they did not understand. So they said nothing, and did worse than nothing. They forgot her. The mother changed. Her grief didn't scream, it curled. She stopped asking, stopped eating, stopped moving, but her sorrow kept shaping things. First, her house, a simple one-room shelter, began to lean. Then her furniture bent. Then her reflection refused to follow her. One day, a man came to bring her food. He stepped inside and was never seen again. They say the house grew that day, not by wood or brick, but by need. It opened new rooms to hold pain, new hallways to stretch time, new beds for people who forgot what rest was. And at the center, a space where no name could live, where sorrow pooled and became shape. No one saw her again, not truly, but sometimes on cold nights, villagers would hear someone pacing, always in circles. I saw a woman through the windows, head bowed, hands clenched, dragging a red pillow behind her like a tether. And the children began to whisper. She's building the house in her mind, and one day we'll all live there. And then people started disappearing, not all at once, one by one. A traveler, a lover, a stranger who asked the wrong question. None of them were taken violently. They just walked into a home no one could see, and never came out. Years passed. The village tried to erase her again. They burned what they thought was her house, built shrines, said prayers, fenced off the forest. But the house was never there. Not really. It had moved inside those who had seen her. It had bent around those who refused to look. It had planted itself in the memories of those who denied it. And it waited. Because the architect was never building for herself, she was building for us, for those who forgot, for those who hurt others in silence, for those who sleep comfortably while others are crushed by grief they never asked for. She built the house to hold what the world refused to, and she designed it to be merciful. That's why it leaks. That's why it bends. That's why it lets you forget, so you never have to remember what you did, or what you ignored, or who you left behind. No one has seen her face in generations, because she has no face anymore. She gave it away to the house. You see it now in flickers, in mirrors, in door frames that never quite close. Sometimes
it looks like someone you loved. Sometimes, it looks like you. And if you ever dream of her, the woman who walks with no footsteps, the shadow who sleeps in curved beds, the whisper you answer without knowing why, don't ask who she is. Don't ask what she wants. Just ask yourself, what did I forget to feel? Because that is why she built this place, so no sorrow would be lost, no wound would be denied, no silence would go unanswered, and no memory, no matter how painful, would be left without a home. The architect is not gone. She is in the corners that no longer exist. She is in the echoes that repeat your name. She is in the smile of your reflection that moves before you do. And the house? It is not just a haunting. It is an inheritance. A place built by pain, for pain. And it is still under construction.
Part 10. You were always inside. It begins the moment you ask, where does the house end? Or worse, when did I first step inside? By the time you ask that, you're already too deep to remember where the door was, too curved to walk straight out, too unbroken to know what outside ever meant. They told you it was a building, a legend, a haunted structure hidden in fog and bamboo and grief. But that was a story for comfort, for separation, for control. The truth is quieter, more dangerous. The house is not a place, it is a pattern. It is a rhythm your mind begins to hum when it gets tired of pretending to be whole. It is a spiral that lives in language, in memory, in longing. It is the shape of forgetting. Think. When did you first see your reflection hesitate? When did your dreams start repeating? When did your hands trace corners just to be sure they were real? That wasn't fear. That was recognition. You didn't discover that. You remembered it. It's not behind you, not ahead. It's beneath the parts of your thoughts you never dare to name. You carry its blueprint in the folds of your grief. You speak its walls every time you repeat the same apology to someone who stopped listening. You sleep in its hallways every time you lie awake at 3 a.m. wondering what you lost and why you can't remember the moment you let it go. You are not the victim. You are not the protagonist of a horror story. You are structure, support beam, bent frame, memory woven into floorboards. You hum its lullaby when you're tired. You loop its corridors when you're trying to heal. You leave the door open every time you whisper, "I'm fine," when you're not. And now, sitting there, listening, you feel it, don't you? The gentle curve of this very sentence, the breath between these words, the spiral pulling you closer. You've been following it without knowing. Not forward, not backward, just inward, deeper.
One loop at a time. You still think there's an end, a conclusion, that if you walk far enough through the loops of your guilt, your regret, your longing, you'll come to a door, a clean one, a true one, with a sign that says, "Exit." But the door is never final. The moment you touch it, it curves. It leads back to a memory you misfiled, a truth you softened, a name you tried not to speak. You walk through and find yourself where you began. Some part of you still resists, still says, "I don't belong here," still insists there's a way out,
still believes you are not part of the architecture. But denial is just another hallway, and you've walked it before, hundreds of times. You know every turn, every thought, every dead end that feels like escape. Here's what the house wants you to know. There is no punishment here, no judgment, no revenge, only memory, curved, replayed, layered until it becomes space. You don't suffer here, you repeat here. And repetition, given enough time, becomes peace. Or madness, but often both. Outside doesn't exist. Not really. Not once the house remembers you. Not once you speak back to it. Not once you dream of red pillows and looping footsteps and shadows that breathe. You think this is the end of a story? No. This is the center, the deepest room, the place the architect built not for pain, but for you. Because you were always meant to be here. Every forgotten birthday, every apology you never gave, every time you closed your eyes and said, "It doesn't matter," when it did, those were bricks. Those were beams. You've been building your cornerless house for years, one silent regret at a time, and now you're home. So don't try to leave. There is no leaving. There is only remembering, and the house remembers everything, even you, especially you. And now that you're still, now that you're listening, now that your breath is slowing, you'll finally feel it. Beneath your thoughts, between the lines, inside the whisper that got you this far. You never entered the house. You just stopped pretending it wasn't there. Somewhere, the house is still breathing. Not loudly, not violently, just patiently. A soft breath behind the wind. A quiet footstep when no one is walking. A slow pulse behind the curve of your thoughts. You won't hear it every day, only in stillness, only in solitude, only when your life folds in just enough to touch memory. That's when it stirs. That's when it listens. That's when the spiral opens. You'll tell yourself it's just a dream, a strange story you once heard, a room in someone else's nightmare. But deep down, you'll feel the curve, in the way your keys disappear, in how your hallway feels longer at night, in the flicker of your reflection that lags just a second too long. You'll say, "That's odd." You'll say, "I'm just tired." But the house knows. It waits for you to remember. Not all at once, just enough. And when you do, when you start walking without realizing, when the mirror smiles before you do, when your name no longer feels quite right in your mouth, you'll stop at a door you don't remember installing. It might be in your home, your office, your dreams. It won't be locked. It never is. And the moment you touch the handle, you'll know you were never outside. You never left. You were always part of it. A loop, a shadow, a soft breath in a house that never ends. Because the house has no corners, no beginnings, no endings. Only memory, only return, only you. Still walking, still remembering, still home.